Story 1. Back in the early 2000s, I was the information technology manager for a small company. In May of one year, I hired Robin, the first female in our department. She was a church friend of one of my team members, and he recommended her. I made sure she met the other team members and gave them time without me present. I not only got his feedback, but I also made sure she had a good impression of him before I hired her. Everyone got along, and things were running smoothly for several months. The Friday before Thanksgiving, we had a company get-together, and everyone's spouses were invited. That's when Robin met my husband. I left on Saturday for a 2-week vacation, and when I got back, my boss called me before I could even boot up my computer and asked me to come to his office. While I was away, Robin accused me of sexual harassment. Human Resources conducted their investigation and said they could find no evidence of it because it never happened, but they offered to transfer her to another department, and she declined. Then she said I was an incompetent manager. My management style was to assign projects based on people's skills or interests, or let them decide among themselves who would take on what if it wasn't specific. The other 2 people in the department loved the freedom and trust. Robin apparently did not. My boss said she couldn't point out any specific requests she made that I was unresponsive to, nor could she think of any time I singled her out or treated her differently. The fact that I wasn't micromanaging her made me a bad manager in her eyes. My boss told her that might be new for her, but that was how he managed, too, and he had never heard anyone complain about being trusted too much or given too much freedom. He suggested she tell me that she needed more oversight. She said she wasn't comfortable having that conversation, so he offered to do it for her. That's when she said she couldn't work with me because I am gay. My boss asked her if I had said or done anything inappropriate, and she said no. In fact, prior to meeting my husband, she thought I was talking about a roommate when I referred to him. Homosexuality was against her religious beliefs, and she never would have taken the job had she known. My presence created a hostile work environment for her, so she believed he had to fire me. She was also outraged that my boss dared to call himself a Christian and would accept someone she perceived as blatantly sinful. My boss told her to get over it or quit because he was not firing me over her religious beliefs. She quit. When I got back to my desk, the guy who recommended her said she started causing trouble at church, trying to get him thrown out of the congregation since he knew I was gay. He said the church had several lesbian and gay members and had never said anything negative about homosexuality, so he was surprised at her stance. The preacher asked her not to come back. I was blown away by Robin's sense of entitlement. She thought her being an evangelical Christian meant she could dictate who a company could hire or who could attend a church. I was thankful that everyone, my boss, Human Resources, my team, and even an unknown preacher had my back. Story 2. I was thinking to myself today that treating Reddit like something of a diary is quite cathartic. Then I remembered I hadn't updated. Sorry about that. I will try to keep this short as I am on my phone taking a break from cleaning up. A couple things have happened, so I will try to sum it all up. Dulce came by the next day after my last post. She was sheepish and embarrassed and pulled me into the living room to talk. She then apologized. A lot. She said she panicked and made a scene and put me on the spot. She then said, "I'm such a drama queen," and laughed, but that was a put-down my dad used on her, so I just snapped and launched into this whole verbal vomit bomb. I don't remember all that I said, but the pearls were that she's not a drama queen. Dad used that to put her down, and I notice she's been doing that a lot ain't his death, using words to put herself down as a sort of self-deprecating humor, which is fine unless she really believes it. I told her that I've been doing the same to myself internally, and it's not healthy. I explained a bit about how I was feeling, loved but lonely all at once, and trying to balance the pain, and the shame felt like a full-time job, and Dad's in my head berating me and putting me down constantly. I akined it to a Marvel show she likes, Daredevil, where he sort of hallucinate his sorry, and she laughed. Then I simply came clean about the letter, what I did and why. I basically said everything from my last post. It hurt me to see her hurting so much, and that it was almost like I was overflowing with all the love I never allowed myself to feel for her as my littlest sister. I got protective and scared and selfishly wanted to end her pain so I could stop feeling it. Her superpower is that she lives and feels so hard so much all the time that it's infectious, and I still lack the emotional intelligence and tools to feel in a healthy way. I apologized to her for all of this throughout the whole thing, and just blurted it all out. And then, without even realizing it, I had started to cry through the last bits. I told her I love her so much, not just because of all the comfort and joy she gives me, but because my blinders and dad are gone, and I can see what a kind, caring, sweet, and vibrant person she is. And this mistake, this awful mistake, was such a slap in the face of her forceful trust in me that I am scared shitless. It will be the last straw, and she will cut me out once and for all, and I wouldn't blame her. I said that if she couldn't forgive me and wanted me to leave her alone from now on, I would respect it. But I really hope she can forgive me and we continue to bond and make up for all that lost time Dad stole from us, and I can make up for my own hand in her harm. She listened to me go on and was crying too, and she just jumped at me and hugged me, and we cried together for a while. I can't explain the feeling. I was so relieved and sad and grateful and angry and 1,000 things I don't have names for. She forgave me and said that once she had calmed down at work that day and really thought about it, she thought it was odd she would just drunkenly go into my study and put it in the drawer, and she came to suspect I might have put it there, but didn't have the balls to confront me as she was scared. I would double down I was known to do that and blow up and cut her out. We made a promise to never abandon one another, to really be family from now on, and to talk things out when we get scared or feel a big emotion. I brought up the prospect of us burning the letter together, and she did buck at that at first. I didn't push, but we had dinner and watched some TV, and she spoke up saying that she's not ready to destroy it yet. The words are hurtful, and it breaks her every time she reads it, but it's his last words to her. She said he usually talked around her, or outright ignored her, unless he was saying something hurtful or ordering her around. But at the end of the letter it says, "Love, Dad," and she can't remember him saying he loved her or calling himself her dad. No step, just Dad. And it's hard to let go of that. We agreed to get group therapy with our other sister to talk through all this, and that she will work with her therapist in her one-on-one sessions to let go of the letter. She liked the idea of eventually burning it, thank God, but just not quite yet. She apologized again, and I sort of laughed, and she looked horrified, and I had to quickly explain that she should not be apologizing for any of this. All of this shit has been done to her. But I love that she is so sweet and so willing so often to simply say sorry, which is astounding me because up until a few months ago, I was constitutionally incapable of such a word or accepting blame. I find it hard, and she does it so easily. But I hope she someday gets to a place where she can stand tall and wait for a due apology to her, and not throw herself under a bus she didn't deserve. I ruffled her hair, and she was smiling like a kid. It felt like a real moment with my little sister. A genuine, simple moment. I cherish it even as I type this. We did call our youngest sister and explain what was happening, and if she'd be willing to go the therapy session with us. She didn't seem overly keen, but simply asked for the when and where. We looked up appointments on the online portal, as we all see our therapists from the same group, and booked a slot for Friday evening. Baby sister did admit to wanting to talk stuff out with us and feeling hurt by us both, and by our moms that everyone just seems to be glad he's dead. We said we can talk all about it and are opening to hearing her side of things. I think we have a real shot to work this out as a family. We just needed to be honest about our feelings. If I update about this, I will try to just add it to the bottom of this existing post, since we're two posted updates in, and brevity, it seems, is no longer a skill I possess. In the meantime, be good to each other, love one another, and enjoy every moment of those you love and love you. Thanks so much. Story 3. I've been lucky enough to avoid encounters with entitled people until recently. Honestly, I thought the internet exaggerated when it came to these kinds of individuals. But I've come to the sad realization that they do exist. And my faith in humanity has dropped just a little more. It's even more disheartening when you realize that some of these people are raising the next generation. Anyway, I work in the solar industry, mainly residential, as a service technician. Whenever something goes wrong with a solar photovoltaic system, I'm the guy they send out to fix it. I've been doing this long enough to have the knowledge and skill to complete an entire installation by myself, provided the roof pitch and module count are within reason. One day, I went out with one of the crews for an installation, as they were short a few guys. So, myself and two of the other technicians I work with volunteered to help them out. It seemed like a pretty standard job, over 40 panels, not a steep roof. We figured we should be in and out, and with good timing, back at the shop by 4-5 p.m. We arrived at the house, which was in what looked to be a pretty affluent neighborhood. The homeowner greeted us and even offered to grab us all breakfast. So far, it was a good day. We set up an exclusion zone to prevent anyone from coming too close to the house, as equipment, tools, and other items could fall off the roof. I was on the ground working on building the electrical portion of the system, with my music playing, and I was in a good rhythm. Then I noticed a child, who couldn't have been older than 7, dart past the red tape we had put up and head toward a ladder leaning against the roof. He started trying to play on it. Like any responsible adult with common sense, I ran over and told the kid he couldn't play on the ladder, and that the red tape was there to keep him safe. And then, the moment you've all been waiting for, Karen appeared. She had it all: the haircut, the sunglasses, and one of the worst spray tans I've personally seen. It's summer. People just need to get some sun naturally, for goodness sake. Don't talk to my son like that. He just wants to play with your tools, she said. Ma'am, I can't allow him to play with our tools. Also, I can't have him or yourself pass that red tape. We put it up for your safety, I replied. Oh, he'll be fine. Just tell your workers not to drop anything, she responded. I lost a couple of brain cells from that reply. I can tell them not to drop anything all day, but accidents happen, and we cannot risk anyone who isn't a worker getting hurt. Now, please leave. This is an active work site. I can do as I please, and so can my son. We're friends with these people, and they let my son play in their yard. You should be more respectful when talking to potential customers, you know, she snapped back. Ma'am, until I have site plans for an installation on your house, how I speak to you isn't a concern of mine. If I sound cross, I apologize, but I've now told you twice that I can't have you pass that red tape. So, I'm asking once again, please take your son and leave before either of you gets hurt. This is an active work site. She grabbed her child by the arm, stormed off, and tore off a section of the exclusion zone tape before marching back to her house 2 doors down. I stood by our trailer to take a breather and began chain smoking. I try not to get too stressed out, as my job is already stressful enough. But I have zero patience for people with no common sense, especially if they're a parent. A little while later, the panels were prepped. The roof was based out for anyone who knows about solar installations. We used a rail-less system instead of actual rails, and we were just finishing up the electrical work before placing the panels into position. I was running between the basement and the outside area. When I got back outside, punching in some wires, I heard one of my guys yelling from the roof. Hey kid, what are you doing? That immediately caught my attention because I thought the same child had run past the exclusion zone tape again. But then I saw a guy running down the road with a solar panel in tow. Thankfully, he wasn't very fast while carrying the panel. I darted over to this kid with one of our solar panels and tried to rip it from his hands, while simultaneously trying not to let it hit the ground. I managed to get my hands on it, but this kid actually put up a fight and tossed the solar panel, putting me in an awkward position. He then landed a full-on punch to my chest. I won't lie, it did knock the wind out of me a little. But I went into full self-defense mode. The kid wanted to take another shot at me since I didn't completely go down, so I immediately put him on the ground without throwing any punches. I didn't know how old this kid was, and I didn't want to get into trouble for hitting a minor, but I wasn't about to let him keep hitting me. I'm thankful I have a little background in amateur mixed martial arts and a police officer dad and older brother who've taught me some things over the years. So, I had the kid pinned to the ground, and out comes Karen, running and screaming like a banshee. The typical, "I'm calling the cops," and "you just assaulted my son" nonsense. I really had to ask myself if this was actually happening. "Your son was stealing a solar panel and punched me in the chest." I had to defend myself, I told her. I told him to grab the solar panel. "My neighbor said I could take one and try it out to see how I like it," she replied. At this point, my guys were at my side, and I told them to call the cops and keep Karen away from me. As we waited for the cops to arrive, this orange-skinned lunatic was ranting about how she was going to sue all of us, and so on. The cops arrived about 10 minutes later. I removed myself from the kid, and the cops split us all up to take our statements. Karen stuck to her story about how her neighbor said she could borrow a solar panel and try it out. Now, even if he did say that, which he didn't, you can't just let someone take a solar panel because they still belong to the company. Most people who buy solar panels finance them and pay them off over the course of the next few years. It works a lot like financing a car. It got to the point where the cops asked if I wanted to press charges for the assault. The homeowner whose house we were installing the panels on had a security camera system that caught the incident on tape, so I gladly said yes. I have no idea when the court proceedings will take place, but I honestly just want this over and done with. Story 4. Before diving into the story, let's set the background. I took up a job at a precast concrete company during the transition from high school to college. Although the job was unpleasant, the pay made it worthwhile. Our main task involved manufacturing large storm culverts and tunnel pieces that were later installed on construction sites, rather than being made on site. After a few weeks of working at the company, I was trained to operate the industrial concrete mixer, which became my daily responsibility. This mammoth machine stood 3 stories tall, capable of mixing up to 4.5 cubic yards of concrete at once. It was also the most battered equipment in the entire facility, which spoke volumes about its condition. Operating 6 days a week, 2 shifts a day, the mixer never received maintenance because the company couldn't find technicians willing to work on Sundays, its only non-operational day. Consequently, the machine was in dire need of servicing. The only positive aspect was the automated weighing and feeding system for the materials. All it took was a push of a button to initiate the process. The most common issue we faced was the inadequate sealing of the bottom release door. The door would be slightly ajar, causing all the water to leak out and leaving us with a useless, lumpy mess that had to be discarded in a scrap hole. If this occurred, we had to swiftly empty the mixer before the concrete started to harden inside. Thankfully, this happened only once during my time there, but it took an entire shift to chisel away the hardened material. To avoid such incidents, we made a mark on the sliding door to indicate the correct position for sealing. Now, let's explain the manufacturing process. We began by constructing a cage made of rebar and anchor points on a base, surrounding a core. A form was then bolted around it. After the quality assurance queue of personnel approved the structure, we filled the form with concrete and left it to cure. The curing time varied depending on the ambient temperature, with higher temperatures resulting in faster curing. Once the piece reached the appropriate level of hardness, it was lifted off the core using a crane. This process was repeated until the required number of pieces was produced. Another noteworthy aspect was the color-coded hard hats. Each roll had a specific color assigned to it. For instance, blue denoted plant supervisors, green represented CAP personnel, and red indicated the foreman. For regular workers, there were 2 color options: yellow for those who were inexperienced or less skilled, typically newcomers or less capable individuals, and gray for those who were proficient. About 5 months into my tenure, I had earned a gray hard hat, signifying my competence. Now, onto the story itself. Our plant was falling behind the production rate of another facility owned by the company. In an attempt to catch up, we were working 10 to 12 hours every day. Usually, multiple pieces were manufactured per form, per day 2 to 4. However, in our plant, we were struggling to produce even one or maybe two pieces per form per day. To identify the cause of this issue, the company's owner decided to send an executive from the main office to observe and time each section of our manufacturing process. This decision seemed rather foolish considering the critical role temperature played in concrete curing. Our plant was located in an unheated warehouse in a state bordering Canada, while the other plant enjoyed the warm climate of Florida. It should come as no surprise that our production was slower. Before the executive's arrival, during the shift meeting, our foreman explicitly instructed us to follow the executive's directions, but otherwise keep our distance from him. Quite an unusual instruction, to say the least. The shift proceeded as usual, with us constructing cages and bolting forms. Around 6 hours into the shift, I climbed up to the platform on top of the mixer and was greeted by the executive, who was wearing the shiniest white hard hat I had ever seen. He was also clad in office attire, including black dress shoes. It was an odd sight to witness in a concrete plant, and he appeared utterly bored. He asked me if I was looking forward to the end of the shift in 2 hours or so. I replied that, assuming no issues arose, we might be able to leave in about 4 hours. The executive's face dropped, and he mumbled something that I couldn't quite catch. While performing the pre-checks on the mixer, I noticed that the bottom door was once again not closing properly. I shouted down to the plant supervisor, informing him about the door's faulty seal and explaining that the machine would be out of commission until I fixed it. Typically, this involved chipping away the concrete residue left by the previous shift, ensuring the door closed properly. In response to my announcement, the plant supervisor hurled a few choice words towards the mixer, then stormed off into his office. The executive inspected the door and claimed it looked fine. I insisted that it frequently failed to seal and pointed out the mark indicating the correct position. I went to fetch the necessary tool, a braking bar welded onto a rebar shaft, which I kept underneath the mixer. Instead of going through the hassle of finding an air gun and going through confined space lock and tag outs, I could now simply stand on top and chip away at the concrete until the door moved freely. Upon returning with the tool, the executive told me that the seal was fine and instructed me to run it. I reiterated my concerns about the door's sealing issues, asking if they were certain about proceeding. They replied affirmatively, so I started up the mixer. As expected, the mixer released a cloud of silica into the air. With the water draining out from the bottom, the dust situation was about to worsen. I offered the executive an extra mask I had, but they assured me they would be fine. Well, it was their lungs, not mine. Simultaneously, I noticed the plant's heavy equipment operator entering the building. I caught their attention and signaled for them to bring the front loader. They gave me a perplexed expression and silently mouthed, "Why?" I pointed at the mixer, repeated the gesture, and they threw their hands up in resignation before turning away. The front loader arrived just in time to prevent the mess from partially hardening inside the mixer. Consequently, the cleanup became a simple process of dumping the concrete into the loader's bucket, then transferring it to the scrap hole and rinsing out the mixer. Once the immediate mess was dealt with, we resumed the shift after I had chipped away the concrete and fixed the door, enabling it to seal properly once again. We didn't waste much time, perhaps only an hour. When the foreman inquired about what had happened later during the shift, he couldn't contain his laughter for the rest of the day. The plant supervisor approached me afterwards, asking for an explanation of what had occurred. He reassured me that he didn't hold me accountable for that dumb jerk's mistakes, since the executive had explicitly instructed us to follow his directions. As for what transpired in the parking lot, the plant supervisor never disclosed any details. I can only speculate that it resulted in angry phone calls and a significant waste of concrete. Story 5. For obvious reasons, none of these names are accurate. I, 19M, have been living in Europe since I turned 18. I went directly into work after high school and have been almost entirely self-sufficient since I moved. One of the biggest factors in this decision was my parents' issues with my identity as a bisexual man. They never disowned me outright, but they consistently tell me ways I can change back and refer to the me from before I came out as an entirely different person. They have even referred to the me from before as their actual child. This has led to many, many fights. The first year I lived abroad, I ended up going back to the United States for the holidays, and it was rough for a myriad of reasons. The following Christmas, I decided not to go through the same thing and informed my parents I wouldn't be visiting. I used the excuse of not having enough vacation days, and they left it alone. My aunt, who was supportive enough, and the reason I could even move to Europe, suggested I should spend the season visiting my sibling, Sam 23, non-binary, in Canada since she knew I was much closer to them than to my parents. For context, everyone else in my family is pretty intolerant. My older brother has begun to break out of their bubble and has been reaching out to learn more about topics related to sexual orientation and gender identity, but he is still stuck on some of our parents' ideas. Sam moved out years before I did, moving to Canada when they were 18 for college and never moving back, and they never fully came out to our parents. My coming out was a rough affair that stretched out for years as I had to fight for my parents to believe me. They still don't. Sam decided they didn't want the drama of all that, and we bonded over our shared queerness and ostracization. After figuring out that I had enough funds to make the trip, I was beyond ecstatic. It had been years since I'd seen Sam as they had been slowly cutting off the family, and spending Christmas with someone I cared about and who cared about me sounded amazing. We messaged almost every day, discussing ideas, costs, timings, and logistics, and eventually settled on a pretty relaxed trip with money set aside for a few big dinners. At some point, I had the usual forced phone call with my parents, where they tried to show they had an interest in my life. I was so excited about the trip that I ended up telling them all about it. They were a little shocked, but they seemed to let it go pretty easily, and I moved on to small talk about my job. Unfortunately, the next day, they started spamming me about covering my flights to see them that Christmas. I was understandably confused and clarified that I was visiting Sam that Christmas. They explained that it would be so much cheaper if they covered my tickets to see them, and then I bought tickets to visit Sam from there instead of from Europe. This would have cut my visit to Canada from 2 weeks to 3 days. I refused and said that I had already purchased the tickets, and they relented, or so I thought. 3 weeks before my flight to Canada, I found out from Sam that our parents had bought last-minute tickets for our youngest brother, Mike 17M, to come up for a significant portion of my trip. Both Sam and I were shocked and reasonably suspicious about this development, so we reached out for more details and were told that it was actually Mike who planned all this. It was definitely not. He didn't even know how long he was going for. We informed them that we had planned for a very chill stay in Christmas and would be paying for everything ourselves. Our parents affirmed that it would be fine because Mike had his allowance about $100 a month. Sam and I were floored. They were sending their youngest child to a foreign country with only $100 on very short notice. He was already 30 CAD for a ride to the house, and since Sam didn't have a car, that would be how Mike would be getting to and from the airport. That's already half his allowance, and we were planning to do much more travel along with expensive meals. I raised my concerns, but our parents waved us off, saying he could always dip into his savings about $850, which was given to us by our grandparents when we were born, and they added to every birthday. It became clearer and clearer that they were more so sending Mike in an attempt to have some kind of control over our Christmas than for him to actually enjoy his trip. They didn't let up on trying to guilt-trip us about how sad Mike had been that he couldn't spend Christmas with us. It also became clear that they were not comfortable having the two of us spend an entire vacation together. As they didn't want us to create an echo chamber to criticize them, they often referred to our conversations as echo chambers if it was about anything they didn't agree with or want us talking about. Thankfully, we had 4 days to ourselves before Mike arrived, which included Christmas Day, thanks to them buying their tickets so last minute, which was a blessing. We did criticize them. When our brother finally did arrive, we did our best to keep everything fun and civil. We invited him to play group games and video games, figured out how we could include him in playing Minecraft since he didn't bring a computer. But he refused every time as he wanted to continue playing his phone game that he had gotten very into. Fair enough, I get really into games sometimes too, but I was getting increasingly agitated that he would go complaining to our parents about us not including him. Sam assured me that even if he did, it wouldn't be our problem, and we moved on. We got him to go out with us one day and offered to go to a train museum. He loves anything vehicles, which he was pretty excited about, and we covered the ride and his entrance fees. Mike disappeared in the museum, though, and we ended up having to keep tracking him down while we went through the exhibits. After that, we went to one of those food hubs with tons of restaurants to choose from. It was a little stressful for me as someone with a food allergy, but I managed, and we agreed on a table to meet up at. We were chatting through dinner when Mike poked fun at me for not being a real adult, and I snapped that at least I covered the entire trip myself. He asked me if that was really true, and I confirmed that I paid for everything, from the flights to the meals, and then I had to restrain myself when he scoffed. The conversation moved on, and I asked Sam about our plans for New Year's Eve. Mike was leaving early New Year's Eve, so we had the night to ourselves, and we started discussing party plans. Mike brought up how he did not like parties, and I made a joke about how I found them hard sometimes and that social anxiety could be a hassle, not knowing what to say to people and all that. Mike proceeded to say, "Yeah, I mean people are such jerks for not talking to me at parties," and Sam and I had to figure out how to casually move on from that. The night before Mike left for his flight at 7 a.m. he had to get up at 5 a.m. I got distracted playing Minecraft, and before I knew it, it was almost midnight. I closed out of the game and turned to see Mike on his phone watching videos. I caught his attention and told him he should probably head to bed soon, and that I was sorry if I had kept him up. I did my business, got in bed, and tried my best to sleep. But after 45 minutes of fighting allergies, Sam has the most perfect, beautiful, amazing cat. I finally got up to take some meds. When I went out of the room, I found the living room lights still on and Mike still awake and playing on his phone. I told him again, with a little irritation, that he should probably go to bed soon as it was past midnight and he needed to be up early. He just looked at me before going back to his phone. I took my meds and went to bed, annoyed and knowing full well I'd be blamed for keeping him up in the morning. I originally had no plans of waking up to see him off, but I'm a light sleeper and the sounds of Sam moving around woke me up. I laid in bed, trying to decide if it was worth getting up to say goodbye or not when, out of the silence, I heard Mike say, "You know it's my fault that I'm so tired." To which Sam went, "Oh, okay," and suddenly I had the energy to get up. I told Mike that when I went to bed, he was still up on his phone, and when I came out almost an hour later for allergy meds, he was still on his phone. In no way was his obsession with his screen my fault. I gave him a curt goodbye and went back to bed. Hours later, we learned Mike's flight had been delayed. We went about our day and started getting ready for a small New Year's Eve party hosted by one of Sam's friends. It was evening when we found out Mike's flight was canceled, and there were discussions on what to do. Mike offered to stay in a hotel, and I told Sam not to offer to have him back over, as he wouldn't be able to attend the New Year's party, and I could not stand another hour with him. They offered anyway, but Mike chose to stay in the hotel. He ended up staying in the hotel overnight, while Sam and I had an amazing New Year. Weeks later, our parents started berating us over the fact that we abandoned Mike alone in a hotel on New Year's Eve, and were so rude and inconsiderate to him the entire trip. They told us off for not including him properly, not checking in on him during New Year's, and not making sure his trip was an absolute blast. Now it's August of the following year, and they still bring it up as a gotcha whenever they can. Needless to say, we will not be letting them know the next time we visit each other.